All right. Welcome to the Sideboard. My name's Eric, and you're watching another episode of Standard Meta Coverage. If you're returning to the show, welcome back. And if you're new, take a look at the channel, see if you like our content. And if you do, I recommend hitting that subscribe button. We've got a lot of updates and new decks coming for you. But for now, let's talk about Standard and GP Portland. Now, GP Portland was taken down by Shahar SHENHAR with his stock Temur Energy deck. I want to call it stock, but he did make a change that we haven't seen for some months. And I would really like to say that with this top 8 that I could bring you some really new innovations on standard and new decks that no one has seen before. And even though that is slightly true, we will be showing you some decks that we haven't seen here in Ixalan, at least not the exact 75, but nothing really new, as there was 4 copies of Temur or Temur variants in the top 8, 3 copies of Red deck, and a singleton rogue deck, if you will, that was Red-Green Pummeler. And I know that's going to excite a lot of you because Red-Green Pummeler did actually do really well in the past, and a lot of you still have your Red-Green Pummeler cards. So congratulations to James Stevenson for top 4ing with Red-Green Pummeler. So let's look at the bracket here with Christopher Larsen with his 4-color Temur deck. Now this deck is one that we'll cover a little more in depth, but he had a great run in the Swiss, just absolutely destroyed the field all day long, went into the top 8 first seed, and then was taken out by Red deck immediately. And then it was Red versus Red, ensuring that we would have a copy of Red deck in our top 8. And then on the bottom side of that, it was Temur versus Red and Temur versus Red and Red-Green Pummeler versus Temur. And even though Red-Green Pummeler beat Temur once, it was not able to do that a second time, and Shahar SHENHAR did go on to win the GP Portland. So let's take a look at his deck here. So I have Shahar's deck pulled up, and really this is just a stock energy deck. This is exactly what you would expect if someone said, hey, I've got Temur Energy here, you can play this. This is exactly what you would expect. Now, this is what you would expect if you were looking at an Amonkhet Energy deck or Amonkhet Temur deck. Back when they were only running 2 and 3 Whirler or Virtuosos, and the commit to memory is kind of a throwback to some cards that were being to a card that was being played back then, or to a copy that was being played in the decks back then. The rest of the deck looks extremely stock. This is exactly what we would expect out of Temur Energy. In the sideboard, again, throwback to some of the other decks. It's no stranger for Lifecrafter's Bestiary to be in these decks. Slice and Twain, also during the U.S. Nationals. This was used with copies of Torrential Gearhulk by Seth Manfield in his version of Temur. And also, Seth Mansfield also had the Nissa Steward of Elements. So, a lot of cards that we're just really used to seeing in Temur Energy. And there's not going to be any real variation when we look at the other versions of Temur Energy, other than Christopher Larsen's. Now, Christopher Larsen's version of Temur Energy is more what we've started to see out of the new Dark Temur Dark 4-color energy 4-color Temur decks. I want to say basically any of the new versions of Temur that are running 2 copies of Scarab God and 2 copies of Vraska Relic Seeker. However, I've been trying to distinguish the 3 different versions of Temur for a little while, and everyone wants to really wrap those into one. I kind of say there's 4-color Temur, there's Temur Black, and then there's stock Temur. And this is the Temur Black version that plays a lot like Control. It doesn't have the Long Tusk Cub. It runs off the Glint Sleeve Siphoners, has the mainboard Fatal Pushes, things of that nature. However, I have yet to see a list that ran 3 mainboard Gontis. Now, this is one of the things that I thought was absolutely terrific about this deck. He went with the mainboard Gontis, and he went with 4 mainboard Whirler Virtuosos. Now, this is not what we were used to seeing in the Temur Black versions. So, again, this is another mashup, another take on Temur, one that is trying to keep the curve very low with just some really good top ends. Gonti, absolutely phenomenal card. He played this to some great extent, ripped some really good cards off of his opponent's deck. Absolutely good card today, and took him a long way, and it was a good piece of deft touch to block opposing Hydras and things of that nature. And that's another card you won't see here. There is no other card in creature in the 4-drop. There is a couple copies of Vraska's Contempt, but other than that, it's 3 copies of the Scarab God and 2 copies of Vraska Relic Seeker. And everything else is kind of what you would expect in the 2 and 3 drops out of a either Sultai or Temur Energy deck. So again, another merge of the Sultai Temur Energy strategy. In the sideboard, however, he's got a couple pieces of tech that we're not used to seeing. And, Chandra's Defeat, Duress, we are used to those. Negate, no stranger there. The take from Sultai with the Deathgorge Scavengers, Appetite for the Unreal, an additional copy of Vraska's Contempt, and then Hour of Devastation. This is not one we're used to seeing, but it helps really good to knock down those opposing planeswalkers as well as, just wipe out the field. And then a copy of Nicol Bolas, God-Pharaoh, and then for an additional planeswalker, Nissa, Steward of Elements. So a lot of tech here for the entire meta. It allowed him to really shift this deck around, and from what I seen today, Glint Sleeve Siphoner was what really carried this deck through. So, another notch on Glint Sleeve's belt there. Another deck that is just really just using that card and utilizing Glint Sleeve for massive card advantage. It is definitely a card that you have to remove on site. So let's take a look at the second place deck and the power of Ramunap Red, if you will. And it's no stranger that Ramunap Red is using Harsh Mentor. Harsh Mentor in the main board is something that we've seen a lot here lately. Some of the pros say that it's bad because the body doesn't match up. Others say that it's, good. I actually think that when you're trying to push damage and their best option is to throw in a blocker for your Hazoret, at least if they can take an additional 2 points of damage, why not? And we did see a lot of times red deck not actually swinging with their Harsh Mentor because they didn't want to risk losing it. Moving on, because this is not really anything out of the ordinary when it comes to red decks. Now this particular copy, couple scavenger grounds, but no other real deserts. I know we've been seeing the desert red deck pop up lately, but this is not that. Chandra's Defeat, Abrade, more Harsh Mentors, Pia has moved back up on its amount of Aethersphere Harvesters we're seeing in the sideboard, and that's because of the mirror match. Chandra's and Glory Bringers to just go up on the curve. Exactly what we would expect to see out of Standard. So we could talk about Temur Energy. We could talk about red deck because red came in third. Sorry, this is the red-green Pummeler deck that came in third place. But red and Temur, they just littered the top 8 in both the SCG Classic and the GP in Portland. So let's talk about the few decks that kind of stuck out. So this is Red Green Pummeler. We're extremely used to this deck. If you played a few months back, this was a notorious deck in standard for a while, and not a lot has changed with the deck. It doesn't have a lot of new cards from Ixalan, and that's okay because it didn't really need them. It is making use of some of the new deserts and things of that nature, which we've seen in the blue-green Pummeler deck. And it just uses blossoming defense to protect its pummelers. It has a few copies of harness lightning to remove creatures and things of that nature. 4 invigorating rampage, which is kind of the backbone of these red green pummeler decks, and just really allows these decks to just kind of sneak in, get in over you know blockers and things of that nature. This deck was really well placed if you're worried about a lot of Whirler, Virtuoso, or token builds. So that's one of the major reasons to play a Pummeler build if you think that that's kind of where the meta is going. Even Voltaic Brawler, the 2-drop, can get trample. So you can really push a lot of damage with this deck. Other than that, your standard 2-drops in Long Tusk Cub and Servant of the Conduit, 3-drops in Electrostatic Pummeler, 4 drops, a full playset of Bristling Hydras, and this is where it gets interesting. We have 2 Samet the Creature at 5 mana, and 2 Samet the Tested, Samet the Creature, Samet Voice of Dissent, which is a creature with flash, double strike, vigilance, haste. Other creatures you control have haste. Pay 1 white and tap it, untap another target creature. So Samet, really, really cool. Really, really awesome that it is getting some play. And Samet the Tested, a planeswalker that if you watch today, Shahar Shenhar had to continuously pick it up and read it every time it got played, but it did not really impress much in the top 8. However, that was just a few games, and he really did well in the rest of the day. So let's take a look at the sideboard. Even though it is a red-green deck, it kind of turns Jun into game 2 and 3. So with an additional swamp so that it can search that up with the Attune with Aether, some duress, harness lightning, a braid, another copy of a braid, or sorry, a singleton copy of a braid, and 3 cartouche of ambition. We seen this on Hydras today, and this was an all-star on Bristling Hydra. So maybe something we really need to start looking out for is enchantments on our hexproof guys. Boggles and standard, let's do it. Couple copies of Chandra, couple copies of Glorybringer, and then a Struggle to Survive. Other than that, your standard electrostatic pummeler deck. So let's take a look at the 4th place deck. This was another copy of Ramunap Red. However, it did not run Harsh Mentor in the main, and then we had 2 Harsh Mentors in the side. Other than that, pretty straightforward. Some PNLRs, Aether Sphere Harvesters, things of that nature. Again, we could talk about Ramunap Red and Temur Energy and all the different variants that have made the top 8s for the last few weeks. But the real all-star in these decks has been Rampaging Ferocidon, just absolutely requiring an answer against these Whirler Virtuoso decks. Rampaging Ferocidon is currently the standard king of dinosaurs. We really thought it would be something like Ripjaw Raptor or something like that, but so far Rampaging Ferocidon holding true. Alright, so let's take a look at some of the decks that came out of StarCityGames. The StarCityGames Classic gave us 4 decks that I want to talk about, and then we're going to honorable mention a deck that I don't actually have a list for, and I will post that in the description as soon as I have a list for it. But that honorable mention is to Corey Burkhardt, I think it was, who was running a blue-white cycling Drakehaven deck. Awesome deck. I want that deck list. I would like to run that deck, but I was unable to find that deck list at the making of this video. If I do find it, I will put it in the description. So let's look at Esper Approach. We've seen this in GP Atlanta, and here it's making another showing with the main board blue-white approach strategy splashed black for Fatal Push, and then a sideboard strategy. Now, unlike the one from GP Atlanta that had 3 versions of Regal Caracal, this actually just runs Authority of the Consuls to help against the Ramunap Red decks. So this is kind of the new version of blue-white approach. I like it. I like where the deck is going. I think the deck is very strong, and we did see some play of versions of this deck in GP Portland that were in some of the final rounds, still getting some airtime. So, you know, they were doing very well. We did see a mono black aggro deck that was doing really well, and there was one that placed 7th in GP or in the StarCityGames Classic. So let's take a look at that deck actually, and we ran a version of this deck on stream not too long ago, and this card, absolute all-star. But what really pushed the deck we seen today at GP Portland was 4 copies of Bone Picker. Now the deck we have in front of us, the one that 7th placed SEG Classic, did not run Bone Picker. However, it did run the vehicle package with Heart of Kirin and Aethersphere Harvester, crewing those with Night Market Lookouts, and other than that, it just has Night Market Lookouts and Dread Wanderers as the 1-drops. The other versions that we had been seeing have 12, somewhere between 12 and 16 1-drops, if you count Bone Picker. So let's take a look at the sideboard here, as there are a few different versions of this deck floating around that are doing really well. So I think you can get one of the versions for like under $100. Really, really good deck. 4 duress, 4 4th Bridge Prowler. Now this is not a card that we're used to seeing. I have yet to sleeve this up or play a 4th Bridge Prowler, but when 4th Bridge Prowler enters the battlefield, you may have target creature get -1/-1 till end of turn. Reducing a creature's power and toughness by 1 could mean getting through for an attack early in the game. I like it. I can see where it would be really good against, like, say, Ramunap Red or something of that nature. 3 Harsh Scrutinies, which is phenomenal at just early removing Scarab Gods, Bristling Hydras, Hazoret the Fervent, other gods from the hand early. Awesome card. And don't forget the Scry 1 that's on this card. A couple copies of Walk the Plank, some Kitesail Freebooters for additional duress effects, and then some Vraska's Contempt, which would actually top out the curve. Looking at the 8th place deck, now this deck was extremely interesting as we haven't seen one like this in quite some time. This is mono white vehicles. Took 8th place in StarCityGames Classic this weekend, and it runs 2 Inventor's Fair in the land base, and then 4 Sheffet Dunes. Everything else is a plains. So for 1-drops, we've got the powerhouse in standard right now, Sacred Cat, and then the old standby. If you're in vehicles and you're in white, you're playing Toolcraft Exemplar. So Toolcraft Exemplar and Sacred Cat holding down the 1-drops with some Servo's Expeditions. Saram Senior Edificer, top 8'd at StarCityGames Classic. That is absolutely awesome that a Saram deck plays top 8. That's great. I really like the idea of it, and again, that's absolutely awesome. He did only run 3 copies of Saram, 4 copies of Heart of Kirin, which is exactly what we'd expect. Fairgrounds Warden, 3 of here. 3 Gideon of the Trials, another really good way to crew Heart of Kirin, and he's also a really good beater. Aethersphere Harvester, 4 copies of Aethersphere Harvester in this deck. And then Peace Walker Colossus. This is not one that we're used to seeing, but this is a really good vehicle that can just easily sit back and then allow you to just use your mana to crew your vehicles. Awesome card, and I'm sure it was, extremely handy for him. Also, it doesn't hurt to mention the chain in which you can go to a 6-powered creature. If you had to, you could take a single servo, crew a harvester, which could crew a heart, which could crew a peace walker. Not saying you want to do that, but you could. 4 copies of Saram Expertise for more servos, and some Ixalan's Bindings because it's the best removal in Standard right now. Now, looking at the sideboard, Authority of the Consoles, again, just really showing its power against the Ramunap Red decks. A couple copies of Fragmentize to make sure that you have answers to the cast-outs and the tokens decks. Gideon of Trials for a 4th copy. 2 copies of Solemnity, not one that I'm used to seeing, but I can see it. I can definitely see, where it would come in handy. 2 copies of Cast Out, 2 Gideon's Intervention. This card is amazing against approach decks, as long as you can stop the Cast Out. And then you have 2 copies of Fumigate in case, you just need to reset the board. And when you have a lot of vehicles and things, it's really easy to run Fumigate, especially when you can crew them with mana. Really, really strong deck. Mono white. I haven't really checked the budget of this particular deck, but I would be willing to say that other than the Heart of Kirin, Aethersphere Harvesters, and Gideon's, it's probably not that far up there. So let's take a look at the last deck for today, and that's going to be Esper Marionette Master. This came in 14th place in StarCityGames Classic this weekend. And this is a deck that we've kind of seen, especially if you've been running around on MTGO. This deck shows up on Moto a lot, and it's a really, really strong deck. Marionette Master here. This deck is Esper in colors and is built off of Hidden Stockpile. So you're going to see a lot of, sack lands. You're going to see, a lot of ways to trigger Revolt, making this one of the best Fatal Push decks in the field. Now, because this is not exactly a tokens deck, but does produce quite a few tokens, which are all artifacts, this deck has some extremely explosive finishers. Now, that finisher is Marionette Master. Here, we'll go ahead and take a look at this. If you're not used to this card, Marionette Master, whenever an artifact you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to Marionette Master's power. Now, you can fabricate this and have it enter the battlefield with 3 +1/1 counters on it, giving it a total power of 4. So every time you sack a treasure or you sack an Ethereum token, they take 4 damage. If you can build up, create, a nice healthy little stack of artifacts, you can sometimes simply instantly kill your opponent when you play your Marionette Master, assuming your Fabricate trigger resolves on your Marionette Master. Most of the time you can just finish the game out from there. Absolutely phenomenal deck. I really like how it plays out. It was interesting to finally start seeing some of the blue implements get played. And then let's take a look at the sideboard here. Vizier of Many Faces, something that we're kind of used to seeing. Shows up in the deck here. Lost Legacy to help answer, those troublesome cards like Approach to the Second Sun or Approach of the Second Sun. Sunscourge Champion for a little life gain. Jace's Defeat. We see this in Temur from time to time. A copy here, and then 3 copies of Negate. It is important to remember that Jace's Defeat can counter the Scarab God. It can counter Rogue Refiner, Whirler Virtuoso, Confiscation Coup, any of those particular cards could be countered by Jace's defeat. A singleton copy of River's Rebuke, a singleton copy of Settle the Wreckage, Ixalan's Binding, another singleton. A lot of singleton copies here, including Fragmentize. And other than that, really, really cool deck. We might actually even play that on stream sometime this week if you guys would like to do that. So that is our coverage for Grand Prix Portland. I had a lot of fun. I hope you had a lot of fun. We'll see you next time here on the Sideboard.